Ladies and gentlemen, we are live from my podcasting studio in Toowoomba, and I am with my very long-term best friend, Chloe Morningstar. Welcome, Queen Chloe. How are you, miss?
I am well, David. How are you?
Very well. Now, we have done a podcast before. And I think the hook to this, and people see it in the description, um, going from Chris Feeley to Chloe Morningstar, people are going to see that. And we have a podcast with us growing up and everything else out like that. But we are going to touch on that in a second. But what a big change. This is actually the very first time I've spoken to you face to face, so to speak, through the wonders of technology. So,
I hadn't actually realised that yet.
so
Wow. There we
um,
go.
we've obviously been speaking on the phone quite regularly. I mean, your transformation as a person has not really changed or affected our friendship in any way, in
No.
my own belief anyway. But we've never actually, especially with all this COVID going on, we've had to resort to the wonders of technology. So welcome.
No, it made it hard. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was an honour for you to invite me back on. Especially now you're going to have a podcast with the two sides of the coin, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I literally just advertised this on my Facebook and my Instagram less than an hour ago. We've sort of done this a little bit spontaneously, and it's already generating quite a lot of interest, because this for me is a story that is not very commonly spoken of, but also it's also not a story that is spoken of so freshly. And what I mean by that is when I see and especially with yourself coming out or being more public with your newfound identity, and or not newfound identity, in fact probably your old found identity that you allow in public. But I find that any of the podcasts or the interviews with um, someone that is part of the trans community, they've been out as trans for many years. Whilst yourself, Chloe, you've only really came out as trans this year, so probably less than 6 months, I
Yep.
would say. So this,
March was when I officially came out.
so there you go. So
And then May, I think it was May, it was when I moved to the Sunshine Coast that I went public and took it broad.
yeah, and we're going to touch on that very briefly, but I just want to say how brave it is of you to be so confident and out there. And as your best mate, I can say nothing's changed for me, and I'm just as proud of you, if not more, because there's a level of authenticity and honesty that I'm now getting from you. So I appreciate
Thank you. I'm touched.
it. All righty, so let's go from we've only got an hour. We've only got an hour to speak. So let's start from how we became friends, and sort of briefly start with sort of when we became friends. So tell this, you can tell the story this time. Last time I told the story, but because I
Oh,
like
it's so much.
my own voice.
I think we told it in the last podcast as well. Anyway, but for anyone who didn't listen into the first podcast, essentially I was a bit of a shit of a kid in high school, and Dave was a bit bigger than the other kids and known for sorting out shits of kids. And one particular kid had taken, I don't know whether he took offense to something I did or said, or he just plain didn't like me, whatever his story may have been. He decided to pay you, I think was it $5 or $10?
$10. Come on now.
It was $10. I forget details as I get older. It's a touch of senility. Um, yeah, this guy tried to pay you $10 to come and beat me up. And I think you approached me and you're like, hey, Chris, this guy's giving me $10 to beat you up. So this can go one of two ways. Either I'm going to beat you up, or we could split this money. You tell him I beat you up and we'll go and have mad feed at the tuck shop. And I was a shit of a kid, but I also wasn't particularly brave or big or a good fighter. So I obviously chose to eat instead of getting beaten up. And we kind of struck up a friendship from there. I don't know whether it was fear that kept me in the loop or whatnot, but I stayed one
Funny,
way or the other.
because it was this story wasn't you kept your word. I think this is why for me we became such good friends, is because you kept your word for many years until I think my 21st birthday, where I sort of mentioned the story a little bit, and then you finally admitted the story. And even then, I think at the time, I don't think you're aware that I was the one telling the story, and then you still denied the story because it was a secret. For me,
Wow, that's
fiercely loyal, and I think that's why we have been good friends over the years. So
yeah.
that probably explains the high school friendship. But as adults, I mean, we've been camping for days and days on end. We've shared plenty of beers. We've had plenty of laughs, and we've we've done things that in our older years we probably wouldn't do again. But you would agree that it was quite a macho boys will be boys sort of friendship. Would you agree?
Oh, without a doubt. And for my part of it, it wasn't as if it was a fake friendship or me faking what I was doing. I was in everything I did 100%. There was just some underlying things that I wasn't letting people know. But our friendship was what it was. And the thing, I suppose, COVID and all that notwithstanding, is, and I guess probably even my biggest message to everyone out there, is that I'm still the same person. I can still go and do those things. I could still come and have beers with you. I could still do all the camping with you and stuff. Me coming out as transgender hasn't changed me as a person. It hasn't changed me fundamentally. I'm still me.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think there's some some big differences though, and you've got to sort of paint a picture too. I mean, we both grew up in a town, Sunbury. It's western suburbs. It was a country town, probably 30 years ago. It certainly isn't now. It's now very much metro. Um, I think the introduction of the electric train line sort of transformed our suburb to being quite metropolitan, and traditionally, I mean, Sunbury has been quite an Anglo-Saxon community, so there is very few um, members of the community that are part of the LGBTQ. I'm still trying to learn this. Really, isn't it? That we
You got it right.
we as a community we haven't really been exposed to. I'm sure things have changed now. I haven't been in Sunbury for quite a number of years now, but I guess you get my point with that. I mean, how did you feel growing up in the town? I mean, your general sort of, I won't say opinion of the town, because I think everyone when they leave they sort of hindsight is always 2020. But I think, did you feel that it was quite a, obviously you've no, well, I haven't even addressed this. I know from speaking to you, you've said that you've known that you've been trans since you were a child, and you felt that you're always a little bit different. How did you feel that that was the community? It was a very heterosexual white Australian community. Is that how you felt about some?
It, it definitely is in Sunbury. And look, while that didn't affect me as much while I was still wearing the mask of Chris, so to speak, it was a pressing concern on me deciding to move to my transition, because Sunbury was and still is the place where the, there's bogans and there's bad people there. And I was particularly, and I think rightfully, concerned of my safety and the safety of my property if I were to come out in a place like Sunbury. And look, I know there's transgender people that live and work and thrive in Sunbury. It just seemed to me to be an unnecessary risk. As far as growing up in Sunbury, I don't really feel it as much because, as you mentioned, I've known since a child that there was something different about me. Whether I knew that that was specifically that I was transgender or not remains to be seen. For a lot of years, I didn't know what transgender meant. For me growing up, I knew I was a bit different to everybody else, but that was sort of as far as it went. But I was also not the dumbest person ever, so I guess I just learned to keep my mouth shut and just go with the flow, which I did for a lot of years.
So, like I said before, let's touch on that. Now that you mentioned that you always felt like you were a little bit different growing up, let's touch on that. And that hindsight, I mentioned before, hindsight is 2020. Now looking
Mm.
back as an adult, when do you, now looking back, think would be one of your first signs that you effectively were a female trapped in a male's body?
Okay, so that didn't even happen in Sunbury. The first time I sort of tried to come out was roughly around 2010, 2011, and I was in the military in Perth at that time. And I sort of let a few of the guys know that I felt a bit more feminine than the rest of them, and sort of tried to dip my toes there. And that didn't end well. That did not end well for me at all. It
What do you mean it didn't end well?
it sort of got me laughed. I was ridiculed essentially by my peers and ignored by my superiors. It led to me having a mental breakdown, which ultimately led to me coming out of the military, and then led to the next stage of my life, which was coming back to live with my cousin. That's probably the first time I tried to come out in my memory. I had flickers through my teenage year where I'd get caught wearing girls' clothes or caught with makeup or something, but it was always super easy to explain away. I think one, because people didn't want to know about it, and two, because I I can hide things when I need to, and I've proven that by completely blindsiding everybody this year.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think I mean, I spoke to your stepfather recently, and I said, "What do you think about this? You know, like, did you see any warning signs?" And he mentioned, I hope you don't mind me saying this. He mentioned that he come across, now in hindsight, he remembers finding women's lingerie in your drawers as a teenager, and he, now in hindsight, he now understands why that was found. Well, before he
There's a
thought
reason for
few boys.
it.
You know? And I got to say on that, in terms of blindsiding people, I think no one was more blindsided than myself. Really, I certainly didn't see that one. And to be fair, I think if I was to be completely honest, it took me a while to even just get my head around it, and I had lots of questions. And I think we've been going through this process as a friend, as close friends for weeks, really, of me asking questions and you being very open and candid and honest with me, and trying to get my understanding, because it's not something that is the I won't say the norm. I'll say it's not something that is as common as heterosexual people or gays and lesbians, I suppose we'll say.
No,
It's
I do have a point on that. And I've forgotten it. Continue. Sorry.
no, that's okay. So I mean, I mean, so let's talk about, just very briefly. I mean, so you're ridiculed. I mean, and for the most part, and we've touched on this in our previous podcast. I mean, do you attribute the 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 fact that you fighting with your identity, between being a man and woman, or was you more, what drove, and I think this was quite a, we spoke about this on the last podcast, where you struggled with substance, and alcohol and a few things like that. Do you think it was struggling between being a man and a woman, or do you think it was more being accepted and non-accepted? Because I mean, effectively, you were rejected by your peers at the time. So, do you think what was the more pressing factor? Was it the fact that you were coming to realize that you were trans, or was it the fact that you were coming to realize that, or you not even realize it was the fact that you weren't accepted by your peers? Which was the more prominent issue?
That's a really, really good question, and honestly, not one I've actually thought on too hard. I would have to say, because back then, it wasn't a matter of I'm trans, I'm trying to come out. It was still a matter of I'm different. I like to wear girls' clothes. I'm more attracted to doing female things. Um, why why am I like that? That's sort of the path I went down. But there was definitely, after the reaction I received from my peers, there was definitely that element of, oh my God, this is what I'm gonna face if I try this. So I didn't try it again for years. And as you said, that led into, probably indirectly and maybe directly, into my substance abuse and the progression of pretty much all of my 20s, because however old I was in uh, in 2010, I think I was probably 22, 23 or something. So that's still quite a young age.
Yeah, 100%. Um,
So
if you would have
no,
picked,
you go.
I've put you on the spot here because
You have.
we very briefly talked about this podcast, and for those people that might be watching it at home, um, Chris knows what I'm like to start with. I'm quite blunt.
Chloe.
So, well, there you go. We're going to talk about that in a second too. Well, Chloe knows. We are going to talk about that in a minute. Chloe knows how we this is completely unscripted, obviously, and so this is why I want to ask some of these questions, and we've deliberately avoided some of these questions, me asking you, so we could save it for this podcast, so it could be raw and honest and unedited
Yep.
as this.
No, I don't want the editing either. So all right, I'll give you a definite answer. I've just had a bit of time to think on that while you were talking. I would say it would probably be more hard to deal with the acceptance, because the matter of being trans, even if it's a question, even if it's in your mind, one way or another, that's going to happen. The acceptance is something that's a variable outside your control. So for me personally, I don't speak for the community. For me, I think that's the acceptance rejection side of things would have weighed on me more back then than the isn't she question.
Well, the reason I asked, this is not a question that's just popped in my head. I'm going to be quite honest. I'm setting up a bit of a trapdoor here. Not for you, but I'm setting up a trapdoor for leading into this. I've done a little bit of research, and part of
I would expect
part,
nothing less.
part of that is research into what is trans and how the community accepts it. And I want to put a pin in that, and I want to bookmark that so everyone, because we're going to talk about that slightly later, is about
Yeah.
that there is a suicide rate for trans people that is 43%, right? So I want to put a pin in that, and the reason I'm putting a pin in that is I'm illustrating a point that it's not actually, in my opinion, it's not actually, and I'm no doctor. I'm wearing a cowboy hat. Doctors don't wear cowboy hats, but I'm putting a
Hey,
pin.
they can if they want to.
Well, they probably could, but they're smart enough to know better. But my point is that I'm putting a pin in that. I want to demonstrate that it's not actually the part of being trans that is affecting that suicide rate. It's actually the broader community that could be affecting that suicide rate, being that the level of acceptance is contributing to 43% and not, in fact, an identity crisis, let's say. So let's put a pin in that and we'll come back to it in a second. And that's why I told you I've got some juice lined up my sleeve, and we're going to get to that later. And the reason why
Yeah.
later is because we're going to go to the next part of your life. Okay. So we've been heterosexually,
Yeah.
we've been heterosexually male. You've identified as a male, as far as the broader public and your peers and your and your friends know. You've gone to Perth into the military. You've effectively test run coming out. Hasn't gone so well, and you've come back to Melbourne, and it's Chris Feeley as much as we know. I want to fast forward many. You had a couple of heterosexual relationships since then, and I don't want to touch on them too much because obviously they're very personal. But did you try in any relationship? Did you try to be so? Some of these relationships were quite long term. Did you try to speak to any of your partners over that period, and how did they? So you were rejected by your peers, and how did your partner, who knew you as Chris and loved you for who you are, okay, and for all that you are, how did they react to your? Did you bring it up? Did you have that conversation
Yeah.
with them as a couple?
See, it never came up as a question of being transgender because it was one, not a fully formed thought in my head yet, and I didn't make the decision. And we'll go into choice first decision a bit later on for the people that may be like, oh, well, it's not a decision. There's an element of that I'll cover. I didn't realize that I was going to make this decision till November 2019. So my previous relationships, I've always in some way or another brought up my femininity to a degree, and it's had varying levels of acceptance, but it's ultimately led to the downfall of a lot of my relationships. One thing I realized with the failure of my last relationship is it's probably something I needed to be bringing up at the start of a relationship, not halfway through, just out of fairness to the person that I was in the relationship with. And that's a flaw within myself that I've addressed and learned from and moved forward into the future. As far as it coming up, it came up in cycles because pretty much all through my early 20s, up until November 2019, I would go through phases of I would get super feminine for a while and I would bring all my clothes out and makeup and I'd play in the privacy of my own home and I could guarantee that no one was coming and whatnot. Then I'd have that other side where I would feel ashamed of myself. This isn't what men do. This isn't the way men are supposed to behave. And I would go through what I would call purge phases. A couple of relationships I've had have coincided with the purge phase. So in particular, my last relationship that I had prior to coming out, I'd gone through a pretty big purge phase shortly before meeting that person, where I had actually burned everything I owned and completely, I thought that at that point I'd made a decision that no, this isn't what men do. I'm living my life as a man. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes on that. This is the way it's happening. However, life and psychology doesn't work that way, and it exploded out of me massively and uncontrollably about halfway through that relationship. And that relationship had other cracks in it, but this certainly didn't help. The way I sort of see it is that there was a wedge in the crack of our relationship to begin with. This was the hammer that drove that wedge home.
Yeah. So even though, and you've touched on that, where you said the choice versus is this who you are? I mean, you made a choice. You made a choice to live a
No, I made a decision.
decision, right? You made a decision to live as your cisgender. And for those people that don't know what cis means, and I had to learn this in this process, cis means the gender that's on your birth certificate, effectively. So, what
Well, mine's female.
is well, your birth certificate means cis. It's the gender that has been assigned to you at birth. So, basically, from basically your genitals, but
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
didn't mean to be saying genitals on my my podcast.
Look,
It's only episode 5, I think. But
I think that when you're podcasting a transgender person, the word genitals is going to come up, and it's going to come up often.
we are going to talk about that very shortly. But so you did make a choice, and it's still, like you said, psychologically made
No,
a
I
decision.
made a decision. All right, so let me clear that one up. So the way I look at it, and this isn't backed by science, this isn't, no one's written a book on this, no one's made anything. This is me talking, and maybe people will paraphrase me in the future. I don't know. My egocentrical brain would like that, but whether that happens or not, it'll be in my book, so people will be reading it there. Anyway, I'm digressing. For me, this was never a choice, but I had a decision to make about this. So for me, biologically, in my DNA, in my chromosomes, in my RNA, there's something in my body that said, okay, you're not a man, you've been born as a man, but you're not a man, you're a woman. So this eliminates me having a choice on this. However, I did have a decision to make on whether I pursued my truth and come out as trans, start flying the flag, start living my life as a woman. I definitely had a decision on that because I could have decided to keep stuffing it down, keep living as a man, which would have ended up, I don't know where it would have ended up. It might have gone well, it might not have gone
You
well.
said it did explode. So I mean, even though you were deciding to live as a man, you really, it wasn't an effective strategy to overcome your woes.
No, it was manageable, but as I was getting older, it was getting less and less manageable. So the way I look at it, and anyone can feel free to disagree with me on this, I look at it on, while I never had a choice, I certainly had a decision to make, and I made it, and I don't regret my decision.
Beautiful, and that's sort of what I mean. You know, um, that was, I guess, a process for you, and so let's go through what I know as part of that process. I mean, it wasn't just as simple as, hey, one day, hey guys, I'm Chloe. Like it wasn't as simple as that. I mean, you
It probably looks like that to a few people, though.
so, but from my point of view, it was okay. Well, you started dressing differently, and so what I mean by dressing differently, there was um, you know,
Oh, I remember
very
this.
pink scrunchies and pink jumpers and tights and pink runners and stuff, and
Then
dressing.
I wore to the bush party that you invited me to.
Came to my birthday party and wearing the sticks. And I love how the fact that you thought people look at you funny, and my mates just was like, "Hey," at the time you were Chris. "Hey, Chris is pretty cool," and then like no one judges. And I think that's a that's a great sort of, in my mind, at least anyway, and maybe whether you recognise it or not, but in my mind anyway, it just shows how far we've come in 2020, that people actually don't give a fuck. Like people, you live your life. If you want to dress with pink polka dotted fucking jumper on, no one gives a fuck. People don't give a fuck that I wear a cowboy hat and wear a hoodie. You know what I mean?
Except I'm never going to wear polka dots because that's atrocious.
Well, now you can be the judge on that. But my point is that I think that was a great example in my mind, at least in hindsight, looking back, going that, the world had come a long way since when you were in your 20s, and the world has moved very, very quickly when it comes to awareness, but also acceptance of just different people anyway. At least in my mind, it has anyway. Um, and so that's a great example of my birthday party where everyone's country as bogans. We're all dressed in riding horses the day.
At what someone was expecting, like I was still testing the waters at that point, and I was dipping my feet, and for me, security was a very big thing in those early days of coming out. My confidence got knocked down when I was in an area that I couldn't control, and I thought we're going to your house for a birthday party. That's great. I can control that space. I know where everything is. I know what's going on. And then you're like, oh, let's just drive out 20 k's into the forest and have a party on someone's house. I'm like, yeah, great. I'm looking forward to being murdered. Fortunately, I was proven wrong.
Just shows that you are who you surround yourself with, and we've got a great bunch of mates out here. So just shows. But then I guess that progressed. I think you would say, as far as I knew, then it started becoming a bit further. you've just frozen there. No, there you are. It became a bit further than that. I came over to your house, and there was pink throw rugs over everything, and the nails were starting. My internet connection is unstable. You're not on. Hey Sarah, you're not on my internet by any chance, are you? Can you disconnect the Wi-Fi? Thank you. Speaking of Minister for War and Finance. So and then it was starting to become quite flamboyant there, where there was literally glitter nail polish and dresses being worn and everything like that. And still, in my opinion, I don't think anyone was batting an eyelid at that point.
I was trying to make people bat eyelids and no one was. I was almost disappointed.
Yeah, I reckon you were. Now I think about it. Then I think that's when you said that you dipped your toe in, and then what was your next thing is in some
Well, so for me, the biggest part of me coming out was I didn't really give a shit what the wider world was going to think of me. Yeah, I had my safety concerns, sure, but my primary concern was going to be, and always was with what my family and my close inner circle of friends were going to think about my decision. I found in my history, it's always been hard for me to share personal details with the person the closer they are to me, for fear of disappointing them, because that's just a me thing. So I came out as bisexual somewhere in 2019, way before I came out as trans, but I used that as a vehicle to sort of gauge how everyone's reactions were going to be.
It was probably this time last year. It was in the spring and summer because you were wearing dresses.
Yeah. True. True. Yeah. But yeah, so I used that as a vehicle to gauge everyone's reaction, and everyone reacted admirably. Like, I could not have asked for better reactions from anybody. It was truly beautiful, the reactions I got in coming out as bi, and it was a big confidence boost and a step on the way to making the decision that I had coming. You all good there?
Untangling because my head's been pulled forward by my little cord here. And I think that's a testament to, a lot of people in our friendship group have been friends for coming on 20 years now. So that makes me feel a lot older than I wish I was.
Oh,
when you say 20.
Don't you go saying that around me.
But that was great. And then you moved to Queensland, and effectively we're rushing through this because we've only got so much time to fit a small "This Is Your Life" into this tiny little podcast.
Yeah, my life doesn't fit an hour.
I want to touch base on a couple of things because I don't like tiptoeing across eggshells, but it wasn't all positive, was it?
Bring it on.
So there's
no, not at the start.
So I'm going to bring up one. We're obviously not naming names. We discussed this prior. So there was a fair bit of betrayal by somebody that was quite close to you, that you already had slipped your secret out to in confidence, very close to, and she had actually spread that information through, I guess, an organization that you're part of, and we won't mention that organization either. But she'd spread that information through without your permission. What did that betrayal of that person, how did that make you feel, considering that person was somebody that wore a badge of I love people for people and not for their gender, their identity, or for whoever? How did that betrayal make you feel?
Look, it hurt. It hurt. That's not something you would expect from anybody, let alone someone that loved you and you loved them at one point. It left a massively bitter taste in my mouth, which obviously quickly turned to anger.
Yeah.
It wasn't that person's information to share, and
No, definitely not.
it kept me awake. That's all I really can say on that. Is it stung. Um,
It's pretty
I've been jilted a few times, and I've taken a few blows, and that was up there. Finding out that was one of the things that's hurt me the most in recent years.
I think you would agree, Chris. I mean, over our years, we've had our scuffles
Chloe.
with. So we're going to touch on that in a second. Sorry, Chloe. Um, we are going to over the years we've had our scuffles with blokes in the streets, and we've physical scuffles as you do with growing up and being young, hot blooded, people, young people. But I mean, that's probably in my mind. I'm just expressing my own opinion here. Is that's probably one of the most disgusting acts of betrayal. And in my own opinion, I think that is an absolute low life act. Probably worse than a king hit in a pub, when someone has sensitive information about you and to spread it through a group of people that they had um, no right to spread that information when you've spoken to them in a trusted confidence of a relationship. So
No, not whatsoever. And it was like a kick to a gut. I would have rather, after coming out, I was obviously worried about violence being done against me, and I honestly would have rather have been beaten up than found out
yeah,
what I found out. Especially and I understand why it hits you so hard, because we're both people of honor, and I've been in a position to share people's information, and that's just not what I do, and it defies belief that people think that that's acceptable behavior.
oh, I think it's absolutely disgusting, and karma's a bitch, and I like to smile when I say that because it has a way. It has a way of coming around when it needs to, and people don't need to facilitate it. The universe seems to just sort of sort that out. Luckily, that's the world that we live in. But that's enough for some of the bad stuff. Uh, let's get on to some more positive things. I had to touch on that
Let's do it. No, that's okay.
because now I want to touch about some of the funny moments and I've already done it 2 or 3 times tonight. This is something that I get asked as an associate of yours or a friend of yours, is how do you go, David, with remembering, because you got to remember, like, we've been friends now for 21 years, Chloe and I. So I've already slipped up a couple of times tonight in that the pronouns referring to you as all for 21, well, for 20 of those 21 years, it's been Chris, 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 Chris. I've always referred to you as Chris. It's never really been Feely like some other people might refer to you as a nickname. You've never called me Cannon or anything like that. It's always been bro, blah, 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 blah. That's how it's always been between me and you. Do you find that it's exhausting correcting people? Is it offensive to correct people? Is it frustrating to correct people? Or are you still in that middle ground where you're understanding that people are taking time to adjust, just like I am?
Okay, so there's definitely understanding there. I'm in kind of a unique position with this, though, considering I've moved so far away from my hometown to transition. With the exception of Jess, my housemate and best friend, and one of the people who's known about me the longest time. No, everyone else up here is meeting me for the first time. There's no Chris in their eyes. They're meeting Chloe. They're hearing stories about Chris, and I might talk about things that I've done. But I've got acquaintances up here that have never even heard my original name. So that's up here. I don't have to spend a lot of time. I spend zero time correcting people and getting frustrated about that. I get the odd person refer to me as a he occasionally, and it did upset me to begin with, but now I'm like, whatever, I don't care. The flip side of that coin is at some point I'm going to be back in Melbourne, and I'm going to be face to face with people that have known me for 20 years, my family, old friends, and I am going to obviously allow as much leniency in that as I can, because I understand it's going to be a hard adjustment for people to make. But I am very much along the lines of, as long as I'm seeing progress and someone's making a genuine attempt to accommodate my new name and my, I have chosen, decided pronouns, the pronouns that are what I go with now, which is she, her. As long as I'm seeing an effort, I'm pretty much easy. Like I'll make a joke out of it, like I do with you. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had some friends just before I came out, and I would just make them have a sip of their drink every time they screwed up.
That's not a bad idea. I mean, for me personally, I mean, we've talked about this of there's a difference between politeness and this is a hard hitting one, so brace yourself. So for me,
Oh, I'll bring it.
there's a difference between politeness and also freedom of speech, right? And personal belief and everything like that. So for me personally, I think being polite is I refer to you as Chloe, as her, as much as I can. And it's such a big it is such a big adjustment to make. And as much as I try and try and try and try, I really for me personally, I refuse to be apologetic for making those mistakes because it is a natural form of my biomechanics of that, and it's not like I'm deliberately doing out of malice or ill intent. So there's how do you feel about people that refuse to try and use your pronouns? For me personally, I'm trying, but I refuse to be apologetic for making those mistakes. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at there?
Yeah, no, I get you. First of all, I'd like to state, for me, I don't speak for the transgender community. For me, I would never ask someone to be apologetic for making a mistake if they're making an effort. That's my stance. I'm super easygoing. Like, I'm not going to sit there and harass someone who's making an effort but forgets and expect them to apologize to me. They've got nothing to apologize for.
Yeah.
All you can do is your best. You can't do any better than that. What was the other side of that question? Sorry.
And what have you thought about how you will deal with somebody that is making a very conscious decision not to use those pronouns?
Yeah, I have. Obviously, that'll be easy up here because all of my acquaintances are new people. So that makes it very easy to, if they refuse to adapt to my pronouns, they don't know me by any other name, so they can't screw that one up. But if someone was, for instance, that I just met up here, was to be like, he is this, he is that, either I'll box them out and outsmart them into doing it, which I actually have done, but that's a story I can't tell. And then if I can't find a verbal resolution with that person, I will remove them from my life because obviously my views and their views don't align. Um, and so therefore, if there's no verbal resolution possible, then the only other resolution is elimination. It's the hierarchy of control. However, that works for up here. I haven't come home yet. People have had a social media or a phone relationship with me since I came out. This is going to get complicated and it's going to get messy if I run into a long-term friend in Sunbury that refuses to play the game.
Yeah, and I guess so. And I think your attitude to that's probably a good one because instead of making it a confrontational situation, there's a particular video circulating the internet where a transgender person and is having conversation with Ben Shapiro, who at times can be quite abrasive towards the trans community. Um, and there's some stuff that I agree with him with, and there's other stuff I don't agree with him with. But the trans person grabs him on the back of the neck and says, "If you don't cut that out, buddy, you're going home in the back of an ambulance." And I think that's completely the wrong attitude to have, because your attitude's the right one to have, where you can go, you know what, I don't like this situation. I can make a choice to not be inside this situation. And like you said, you cut them out of your life or you leave that particular situation because that's the way civilization should work. If you don't like a particular situation, you can change it. And that's part of that
Exactly.
extreme ownership that we've talked about before in previous books and stuff.
Oh, I love that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And we can we'll save that for maybe another podcast. But let's move from pronouns and me making a dick of myself and getting Chloe mixed up. Let's move away from that for a minute, because I think my point is I want to touch on some of these topics in the short amount of space that we have, because for this particular podcast, I want it to be a bit of an education. There's going to be a lot of people that are watching this podcast that are from our childhood home, and are going to find this interesting of how it all went down.
Well, we hope so.
Wow, here's where I want to get to. How is it now? So you're cheating now, really? You're playing with stacked deck, because you've lived the majority of life as a male, and now you're out there in a dating world where not only you know how men think, but now you also know how women think, or you've always known how women think, potentially, right? How is getting out there now as a newly bisexual person, as a publicly bisexual person, then also, which is one for those people that don't understand. I mean, you could be completely heterosexual and be trans, or I think that's what I'm trying to say. You can be quite
Yeah.
heterosexual and trans, or you can be bisexual and trans. You can be trans and a lesbian, or trans and
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different variations. And I will just say one thing quickly before I launch into the explanation of my dating life. Um, Being bisexual as well as being transgender growing up made it so much more complicated. It would have been so much easier if I was straight or gay,
Yep.
because there wouldn't have been as much confusion around, am I attracted to this person or do I want to be like this person? There was such a figure. Then you take into account, and I'm going to be candid here, people, we're all adults. You take into account my sexual preferences of dominance, given the fact that I can switch into the submissive role as well. So you have a submissive slash dominant bisexual transgender person. Really think on the complications of that for a second.
It sounds like a clusterfuck. That's what it sounds like.
It does, but it's also led me to some very, very interesting encounters. My dating life, since I came out as bisexual and transgender, my dating life, sort of the end of 2019 to 2020, I went through a phase of experimentation, if you will, and trying different and varied things, and found that I really, really obviously have a love for it. And my sexuality, as I got more honest with myself, opened up so much more, and I got so much freer. And I was able to draw such beautiful, soul nourishing, I think is the word I'm looking for, experiences that are still with me to this day. However, that's not what you're after. You're after how a big go with dating men. Well, David, men suck. It's confusing, and I get why there's a very large stereotype of women being crazy, and it's because you make us this way.
Wow.
It's not hard to tell us what you're doing.
I think
I'm
gonna just
It's not hard to communicate with us. Without getting into a knife fight, what I'm going to say.
well, I think that's the thing, is that for me and you as men have always been, if we say we're going to be here at a particular place, I might
God.
always be 5, 10, 15 minutes late. But I mean, if I say I'm going to be somewhere, I'll be there. And you're very much the same, except on time. So
Mhm.
there seems to be, from our conversations, there seems to be a realization that men are fuck arounds where they stand girls up quite a lot on dates. Is that, do you think that's a factor of the fact of men and women, or do you think that's a factor of man and the fact that you're trans? Do you think it's just a factor of society now? Do you think it's a societal thing? Because I know when I'm only sort of fairly fresh in relationship, 4 months in, where I was finding the same thing from females. So I will slap that back to you and say to you that it does go both ways. But do
Oh, it absolutely does.
you
It
find that
absolutely does.
you're find what do you think you're finding so much prevalence in that being stood up or being people changing plans or being fuck boys, if you will?
Yeah, I've encountered a few of them, and I don't know if maybe it's because I don't have the experience in looking for these signs in guys, but I've been stood up a couple of times in recent weeks or months. I don't know. I don't count. It's frustrating because this takes a bit of time to get ready. Like if I'm getting ready for a date, it's not like it used to be where I just need to have a fucking shower like you do, maybe run some shampoo through your hair, make sure downstairs is good to go, and then you're out the door. It takes me a bit longer. So if I spend all my time in the bathroom and then I get a message going, can't make it today, or I don't even get a message and I wait around all day to hear from this person, then I hear back from them 48 hours later going, I'm sorry, insert lame excuse, I couldn't make it today. It's shit. It sucks. And yeah, and I've actually sort of turned out a bit brutal where I've become quite hard with some of the men I've spoken to, and quite fiery, if you will, a bit of a mouth on that one. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I've
and
noticed there's been a lot more sass coming from you since.
no, because I don't take shit, and some men like that, and some men don't. But there's a definite element of my dating life at the moment which I don't like, and I want to spend probably the rest of my life breaking it because I'm viewed as a fetish item by a lot of men in the dating world, be them gay, straight, bisexual, whatever, wherever the attraction to me is coming from. There's a view with trans women that we are fetish objects, and we're just toys made for sex. We're not real people walking around with feelings and lives. Like I've talked to guys that are surprised I have a job, and I've talked to other guys that are surprised that I go and do things like Spartan races, or I have any sort of hobbies outside coming to their house and giving them a blowjob. And it's kind of soul crushing. When you're filtering through that shit, dating as a single woman, it's quite horrific. And I sort of just see that element of trans women just being completely objectified, and I see some trans women running with it, and it breaks my heart that they feel that this is the best they can be or the best they can do when it's entirely not true.
We're going to touch on how you find your perception versus reality of the trans community in a second, because we are sharply running out of time. But yeah, I think that it is something where that this is our modern society, and it's not just with. I think now that you've pointed it out, like it's this is why I wanted to do this podcast, because a lot of people might not be aware. I mean, you put it very eloquently, as being a fetish item, or being effectively a something obscure that people haven't tried before, and they want to tick that off their bucket list per se, if you will. And it is a sad degradation, degrading sense of our society, and I think that comes through, obviously, porn industry. It comes through also progression in our society of where we're where we seem to have an insatiable need to explore what life has to, and that I think that is a byproduct of acceptance of the trans community as well, and an acceptance of people that are different to us. I mean, I guarantee you that go back 50 years ago, it wouldn't be such a I think dating as a trans person 50 years ago would have been unheard of. So I mean, in one way it's progress, and another way it's also a step backwards. So it's two steps forward and one step backwards in a lot of ways. I'm sure you would agree.
Well, I don't even think it's two steps forward, one back. I just think it is the way it is, and we're dealing with it in a modern world. And you're right. 50 years ago, shit, transgender people were barely heard of, let alone them dating.
Homosexuals were burnt at the stake. I mean, there was women that were, go back far enough, that were considered witches if they were lesbians. So, I mean, if you go, I mean, we have come a long way since those days, so, I mean, it's probably not the best example to use because it's quite an extreme example, but
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, we're not getting burned to death anymore, and I'd like to meet a bitch that thinks she can burn me.
Alrighty. Second beer means the questions are getting harder. So here's the thing. So you've now decided, you've made it, you've now gone with the fact that you don't have a choice. Now you decided to go with the real Chloe, right? You've gone with what you've always sort of, now that you've found answers, and now you're really going with what you found is true in your heart and true to who you are and your honest truth and your story. Now, with that decision and being public with it, comes certain things. So you've gone and seen, so you've got up to Queensland, and you've gone and seen medical professionals that are very specific to this. Take me through. I want you to sort of gloss over this. Take me through step one. What was it? Was it a psych evaluations? Did someone try to do a lobotomy on you? Did they make you put
they tried to
3 packets of cigarettes before you decided that you didn't like to smoke anymore? Like, what was it that they try electric shock? I mean, what was it?
Yeah, they tried to lock me in a loony bin, but I just didn't like the color of the gown, so I couldn't stay. No, look, my process was my process was a bit different to the way it's done normally. So I went and saw a GP. The GP told me that I needed the psychological evaluation first to get me a diagnosis of gender dysmorphia. So one of the first things I did when I landed in Queensland was I went and saw a psychiatrist to get that diagnosis. He told me he didn't need to see me until the end of the run, just to sort of check in to make sure I'm about to make life-altering surgery. So they want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. But he gave me the diagnosis, which came in handy later on. So basically the formation of my team at the moment is a transgender specific general practitioner that I work with, my general practitioner, and an endocrinologist who's in charge of monitoring my hormone levels. And she's tailoring my hormone packages, my hormone replacement package to my body. That's my team so far. So we're meeting again in February to start putting my surgical team together. And then from there, I will add a urologist, a proctologist, a gynecologist, a general surgeon, and if necessary, a plastic surgeon to that team who will then do the work on my body. And then after that, it will be physiotherapy and psychological work.
This is like those car and pimp your ride car shows on on A&E. But
no, man, I'm assembling the Avengers over here.
That's exactly. So let me go back to hormones. So they've prescribed you hormones which are effectively blocking the testosterone that your body is naturally producing. So what are some of
they're doing two things.
So what are some of the changes your body you're starting to see from your body now?
Okay, so I hit 3 months 3 days ago. The changes I'm noticing so far, my body hair, particularly around my legs and arms, is slowing. It's not needing removal as quickly. I'm not having to shave my face as often. It's not growing back as quickly. My eyebrows are not growing back as quickly. Chest and arms are still about the same, and lower body that's never going away. My face is thinning out. My eyes have changed. I don't recognize my eyes anymore. I don't know what's happened to them, but they don't look like the eyes I've been looking at for the last 30 years. They look like new eyes, and I like it. I like my eyes, but my whole face is changing. And I guess the big ticket item is I'm starting to grow boobs.
Right. Now I'm going to ask, is your penis getting smaller, larger, staying the same? Is it starting to? You're starting to struggle to hit hit the mark in the toilet. Are you standing up to pee? You're sitting down to pee. Which I want to know all this stuff. I mean, this is stuff that people at
All
home.
right, I will answer all of them. Like as I said, I have no shame. There's nothing I can't be asked. Okay, I sit down to pee. I don't have to. It still functions as a penis. I could still stand up to pee, but it's sort of like a when in Rome type thing. I feel more comfortable sitting down to pee. I was actually talking with my friend about it the other day, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to try it again to see if I can. And it felt weird standing up. So I sit down to pee. My penis still gets hard and is still the exact same size as it always was. It just takes more to get hard now. I take a lot more sexual arousal to get an erection than I used to, and I don't get spontaneous erections anymore.
So that's got a lot to do with the hormones, though, isn't it? That is very
100% to do with the hormones, yeah.
yeah, and that's a byproduct. I mean, and that'll change. Your sexual arousal will come back once sort of you go through the phases that you.
Oh no, I can get aroused. It just takes a bit longer for me to get there now. It's not like instant like it used to be where you could just look at it and it'd go off. Now it takes some doing.
Yeah, back for the days of 21 and the stiff breeze came past. But moving past the gutter talk, let's say you're starting to grow boobs. For most people in the science community, they call that gynecomastia for men, and that's quite.
Hey, look at you go.
Well, I know that because it's quite a common thing within the fitness industry for guys that abuse performance enhancing stuff. So we sort of are well aware of what happens when you put estrogen into your body when you're fighting over, I guess, too much use of testosterone, and they sort of balance each other out, don't they? But and obviously your dosage with your hormone replacement has to be catered for that, very custom built, if so to speak, for that. Are you planning to get a breast augmentation? Are you planning to get fake boobies?
I haven't made a decision on that yet. I'm going to see what the hormones do for me. For my frame, like I know that women don't really get to choose their boob size, and it goes into breast enlargement, breast reduction, et cetera, et cetera. But I am in a position to choose. Don't think I will exceed growing a C cup, and if I get to a C cup, I'll be happy. If I stop below a C cup, I will augment them up to a C cup. Yes. Yeah, okay. If I go larger, great. But I really, really don't see it from my genetics and my frame.
So from a point of view of, from one is very public, showing that you're a woman, and another is quite behind closed doors, showing that you're a woman. If you were to prioritize, so we're going to, would you rather, if you were to prioritize having a female figure through having breasts, or a female figure through having a vagina, surgically constructed vagina, which one would you choose?
What, like right now?
No, I'm talking moving forward in the future. If you could only choose one, which is to have,
okay,
or to have a vagina, which one would you choose?
The vagina, because I can fake boobs. Can't fake a bulge.
Yeah, true. Right. So now, so we've talked about the steroids, we've talked about boobs, and we're going into obviously some medical stuff here, but there's going to come a surgery where they're going to effectively reconstruct your genitals into an outie into an innie, effectively, and create an artificial vagina, or I'm sure there's a much more technical term than that. Is there a fear associated with that? Is there an excitement associated with that? Have you thought about post-surgery? What if you don't like it?
There's an excitement. There's no fear. If they rung me up and said, you're ready to go today, we've got a spot for you at 10 a.m., I'd be there at 9:30. I can't wait. I really really can't wait. My doctors sense how eager I am and are trying to get me there as quickly as humanly and safely possible. Um, Look, the thought of me waking up with regret hasn't really crossed my mind with how strongly I have felt about this, and how much that strength intensifies as every day that I'm spending as my true self. I really don't see it being a factor, but I'll be in psychological aftercare after the fact. So if that does in some way, there's a bit of, I guess you would call it, for want of a better term, buyer's remorse. um,
No. Reason I
I
ask
think
is that, so before you mentioned that, I mean, this idea of trans is, as much as you've always known there's been something different, but this idea of really sort of understanding that you were trans has only sort of been, you sort of mentioned, maybe a 5 or 10 year old idea. It's not something you sort of grew up as, I'm a as a 10-year-old thinking that you're a girl. Do you think
no, no, no.
do you think that, so that, is there an element of, have you researched of other trans people's story? Is it something that you've come across that some trans people have regretted it? Have you come across
Look,
people that have rejoiced it? I mean, what is your experience, or have you done that research?
I've done the research, but I'm really struggling to find personal accounts of transgender people who've completed the surgery. There's a lot of medical stuff out there, a lot of fantastic medical stuff. There's some blogs and stuff, but in the forms of hard literature, there's almost nothing. Um,
Would you say
so
that
it's
regret it? I mean, they're largely part of that suicide rate that I mentioned before. Do you think that's,
what's that?
so? Those people that are on the "I regret the surgery," do you think that
Oh,
has that run through your mind? And I'm challenging you now with that. Has that run through your mind that
yeah, that's
the reason
actually
why you
no,
find those accounts is because they largely make up that suicide rate?
no. I haven't actually put any thought into that, but obviously we would need to see some more probably statistics on where people were at in their transition versus those suicide rates before you could sort of make a an aspersion on that, if you will. I don't think it's the case. I think that there's so many checks and balances put into place before getting to this surgery that it being done for the wrong reasons or that it being done out of regret is as much as possible eliminated from the process.
Yeah.
But that said, there would definitely be instances of people waking up going, I have done the wrong thing here. But in a way, and I know psychologists can only work with as honest as you're willing to be with them. But in a way, that's sort of a failing on the psychologist if a person's waking up with regret, because there's an entire reason you have to speak to psychiatrists to do something like that, and that's so they can figure out whether you're going to regret it.
Yeah. So I mean, we're talking about uh, psychologists and them being, it's their job to diagnose you correctly and make sure that you're doing. Is there, surely there's an element though of personal accountability though? I mean, aren't you, so at what point does Chloe Morningstar take accountability for this? I mean, I know I've spoken to you previously. What's your feelings with, so the government as a whole, and Australia as a whole, they, like you mentioned it before, you're diagnosed with gender dysmorphia, and it's been as seen as a mental illness.
Oh god, yeah, yeah, I hate that. So is
Yes.
that your question?
Yeah, so that's my question. Is at what point is it mental illness, and at what point is it taking responsibility for the fact that this is who I am? It's not a mental illness. It's a, I'm making it. This is how I feel deep inside, and this is
Hmm.
who I am and who I want to be. I mean, being crazy and making a decision is very, very different. I mean, a lot of people would say
Yeah.
becoming a professional boxer is a pretty crazy idea and pretty dangerous idea. but I certainly wouldn't consider myself as being mentally ill. And that's what I put to you. At what point? So before you've put the onus back on the medical professionals to make that correct decision, but at what point do you take ownership as Chloe Morningstar that this is what I am, this is what I want to be, and this is how I'm going to live with that consequence if if it is the right or the wrong decision that you make.
Yeah, look, you know me. You know I am Miss Accountability. Like, personal accountability is one of my guiding tenets. So if I sounded like I was trying to put it all onto the medical professionals, I apologize and I retract that, because it's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility to be as honest as you can with a medical professional so that they can help you make the best decision about your future. So I think I just worded that poorly. As far as what your question is, it's not a mental illness. I'm no more mentally ill than anyone. I'm as sane as the next person, apart from my non-related to my transition mental illnesses. um, for me, transgender people are just a person with a birth defect, and that's as simple as I can boil it down to. I am just a woman with a birth defect that I am in the process of getting rectified.
If you weren't seen as mentally ill, you probably wouldn't be eligible for this surgery to be covered by the government, though, would you? So, so that's my. I told you I have a few ducks and weaves here. And if you had to go on the other way, I had other questions to go that way. But my point is to challenge the ideas and also convey some of the things that people watching this might think and might. And I'm probably going to get sent some hate here. I love it, but don't send me your hate. I don't care. I want you to understand. I don't care. Um, so at what
More
point?
concerned about my hate.
So if and I'll put this in a different context. So I mean, let's say you were born a female, like a X and X chromosome,
Biological female.
biological X and X chromosome female, right? Um, Now, some might say that, and some girls are born with absolutely. And look, I'm a hot-blooded man. I think about boobs 99% of the time of the day. And let's say you're born completely flat-chested. I mean, could they argue that that's a birth defect? Could they argue that they weren't born with um, body parts associated to being a female? How does that differ
Absolutely.
from you?
I suppose that comes down to a couple of things on how good they can argue, how smart that person is, and how confident they are in pushing their agenda. If you're flat chested and you want to get a big old breast enhancement, you could definitely make that a self-esteem issue and get it paid for by someone. You've just got to find a way.
I'm sure there's some dirty old men somewhere that's willing to pay. Um,
That's not what I meant.
I know it's not what you meant, but I do love dragging things. My point is, and I am just challenging that idea. I mean, in one respect, is that mental illness angle does help you in some ways. Would you agree?
It does, in a way that's not accessible to a lot of other people, but the surgery itself is covered under Medicare, because it's no longer classified as an elective surgery. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but everybody is entitled to this who presents with this.
Yeah.
You obviously need the diagnosis of gender dysmorphia, which is a classified mental illness, to get that, but they're breaking it down. So there's obviously going to end up being a restructure in the legislation surrounding the Medicare, because there needs to be a check and balance on this. For the way I look at it at the moment, while I completely and utterly disagree with its classification as a mental disorder, at the moment, that's the check stopping you right now walking into a hospital and going, give me a gender reassignment surgery, I'm transgender. There needs to be a way to sort of put a check in there, because then if there's no checks and anyone can do that, like I guarantee if you were to go in there right now and have that surgery, you are going to wake up in the morning and go, the fuck did I just do? So that's where it's sort of like they can't just, I guess, and this is my opinion. I'm not an educated academic. I'm just putting my own thoughts and 2 cents out there. I think that at the moment, its classification as a mental disorder stands as that check in the way to stopping people doing this rashly or doing this when they don't have a need to do this.
Yeah, for sure. Now, can I ask a personal question on that?
You haven't already?
Wow, can you tell me that you have to pay for? Do you pay for your medication in some way, just like say
Yes.
the female? So you still have to pay for your medication. It's not a
Yeah, I'm paying for all my meds. I'm paying for all my medication at the moment. It's not overly expensive. I think a lot of what we hear about transgender comes out of America because their public health system is shit. So a lot of the stuff we hear out of America about the transition costing hundreds of thousands of dollars might be true for Americans. It is certainly not the case for Australians. There is a lot of cost that gets associated with it when you add it all up, when you add up all the meds, when you add up the plastic surgery. Restarting a life as a female at 32 years of age has associated costs with it. There's also the downtime I'm going to experience from work while I'm recovering from the surgery. There's the physiotherapy aspect of it. There's a couple of things that, yes, I do get covered that other people don't, but some of those costs can get quite high quite quickly. Go, sorry.
No, well, that's the question that I think a lot of people at home might be thinking. And these are the questions that I've asked you, and I know these answers, and I think I'm playing with a bit of a stacked deck here to be a little bit edgy because I'm an ass.
You're directing it in the direction you wanted to go.
Yeah, 100%. But you know what I mean? End of the day, the questions. This is part of the education process.
I'm happy to share any of this information. Like this is not a big secret. I'm not part of a gang now. Like I want my story and information out there.
Thailand, you might disagree, but there. Look, there's elements to this that I think there's a point in time where this conversation was a very similar conversation with the gay and lesbian community maybe 15 years ago, and this is why I wanted to bring it to the surface to a lot of people, especially anyone that's connected to my socials. A lot of them, I find a lot of people that do follow me on my social media are either from my hometown or they follow me because they enjoy that country lifestyle and the stereotypes that come with that. So I wanted to sort of break down some of those stereotypes, but also educate people what you've gone through. I mean, I can't imagine always having like I'm shocking at keeping secrets at the best of time, let alone living my life as effectively one giant secret, including what it says on your driver's license, where it says Mr. Feeley or Miss Feeley. I mean, now I mean, you chose a last name as Morningstar, which I think there is a comedy element to that.
Oh, I love it.
And I always said, I always agreed with it. I don't think I ever had any sort of backwards pedal because we always, I understand.
I do have a feeling it's because you thought I wasn't going to go through with it.
Yeah, 100%. Like I thought, tell you what, man, you do talk a lot, but so I mean, who can blame me? But I think I guess the point that I'm making is that this has been quite a very calculated thing. Now, in hindsight, this has been quite a calculated thing over the time, and it's something that still needs to evolve as a society. We need to learn to accept this more. There's still things that are the unknown that haven't been decided, like say trans.
I'm going to stop you there for a second. You just said that it's something that society needs to learn to accept. I disagree with that statement. And as with everything I've stated tonight, I speak for myself, not the community. I don't give a damn what society thinks. I'm out here living me, and society's acceptance or non-acceptance of me isn't really my concern. If someone's got a problem with me, that's their problem. If someone doesn't accept me, that's them not accepting me. I accept me. I don't have a problem with me, and I like me. So society, I fit into society. I have a place. I have a job. I contribute. I pay taxes. I go to groceries. I exist within society, but whether that society wants or accepts me is none of my business.
Well, I mean, that's your opinion. My opinion is that they should accept you. So, I mean, that's my attitude. Even, I mean, we're in the dark ages here in Australia. I mean, we only very recently we've approved gay marriage. I mean, which is it's archaic to think that it was even a conversation to be had. And the reason I mention that is because this is, and I bring up the gay and lesbian community quite a lot in relation to trans, and it's nothing to do with sexuality, but more in the fact of using as an example of a community that for a long time growing up I didn't know a lot about, and sort of bringing awareness to it, because that as a completely heterosexual male is that is that's something that I needed educating on growing up. And I didn't really start to get educated on it until probably when I was 17 was my first encounter with somebody or meeting somebody that was different to what I'd grown up with in our very white Anglo-Saxon town. Um, and so that's why I mean about acceptance is you don't always have to agree with someone, but accepting them as they exist and being respectful and being courteous and being that is what our society should be built on. It should be built on being civilized human beings, and regardless of our separate opinions, I think people need to realize that that's what makes our world so great is the point of difference. It's not the point of symmetry. It's not the point of everyone being uniform. It is the point. Our world is so vastly amazing because of our points of difference. And so we've touched on it very briefly, and we've well and truly gone over the time I had planned for today. But I'm going to put this video up, and I'm going to open up to a forum. If anyone does want to ask any specific questions, we can do a Instagram live later on at a later date. I won't put a date because I'm horrible with dates, but it might be even tomorrow. If anyone does have any questions that want to be directed to Chloe, if anyone wants to bring me to checks and balances, bring it on. Because I'm
Argue with me.
yeah, you know what? And we haven't. I wanted to sort of go into a bit of your opinions and thoughts on the LGBT community, but we've run out of time. So it's a conversation for another time. So if anyone does
Indeed.
have any questions or anything that they'd like me to address with Chris, or anything that wants me to bring up with
Chloe.
Chloe, no, I meant that. With Chris or Chloe, is because you know that's a question that I think is very different. If I was to ask Chris a question, it'd be very differently answered to what would be answered as Chloe. And if that does that make sense? What I'm trying to get at there?
Oh, sure. And look, I've obviously readjusted some views and some of the ways I think in coming out to my new life, but that's also just growth. Like, I'm very much a person that when confronted with new evidence or something, I can change my opinion. My opinions aren't hard and fast.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm not sure whether that's a difference between being transgender, or I think it's just a matter of getting older and more mature.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I really thank you for your time. I thank you. It's been an interesting and intellectually sparred conversation with you, and so I appreciate it. You've put yourself out there, which is not as common for someone that is in your position where you're so um, new to this, this lifestyle and this new identity that you've created and identifying as now. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I say to you that I love you just as much as a brother as I do a sister. So nothing has changed from my point of view. Um, I
Or me.
I still know if the world was to go to shit, and we were drafted into some war like World War One times. I'd rather be standing next to you in a dress than most blokes. So I take.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they still don't let women in combat roles, so I'm not sure how that would go.
Well, who knows? But, I guess you understand my point. So I really for coming onto my podcast and bringing an interesting perspective and conversation.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And just one last thought before I go. If anyone does want to ask any questions, anyone wants to know anything, I'm an open book. Shoot me a message. I don't bite. I'm always happy to answer questions and have discussions and argue or whatever you want to do.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All righty, guys. I will see you next time.